Hello, and thank you for joining this video on worship and stewardship resources for small congregations. In this time of the coronavirus, churches are making many adaptations and learning how to use technology in new and exciting ways. And it's my hope that this video will help you have the resources you need to make a difference in your community. My name is Reverend Paul Nickerson, and I have served as a local church pastor, as a conference development person on a conference staff, and for the last 11 years, I've served as a full-time trainer, coach, and consultant for churches all over the country. I'm delighted that your conference is offering this resource to you, and in your conference, a small congregation is defined as a church that may have just a handful of people in worship, all the way up to churches that have 149 average worship attendance. Now that's quite a range, so I'm going to be offering a variety of resources to you, and you're going to need to customize some of those resources to make them fit for your particular church situation and your particular community. On your website at the conference, there was also a worksheet you could download with this video, which will give you a place to take some notes and offer some reflections. There's also in the back of that packet some resources that you can use in the months ahead. If you have not had an opportunity to download that yet, that's fine. Do that in the days ahead. So let's get started with all of this. And I have a PowerPoint for you this morning to share with you. And let's begin with looking at how churches are sharing around worship in this time of the coronavirus crisis. For many churches, live streaming is an option where a number of platforms can be used for this. Live streaming requires a license and some video equipment. Under the resource section of your worksheet, you will see a number of companies offering live streaming licenses. Churches using this option often has to test equipment and use broadband and make sure that their width is sufficient in their worship spaces. Many congregations will use a second platform, such as Facebook Live, in case the primary system isn't functioning properly. For some churches, this is the best option and allows members and guests to tune in live at regular worship services. However, for many congregations, this is not an option. So there are other ways to share your worship service with others. Many churches will audio or videotape a message or a worship service and then post it on a website or other social media. The advantage of this method is the church can then practice and do as many takes as needed to get the quality they would like. Less equipment is needed and pieces of worship can be taped at different times. There are still other churches that don't have internet access and or their members are not able to utilize technology. And thus, for those churches, some are using Zoom, which has a dial-in number that can be used for audio, or a service like freeconferencecall.com. And members can have an audio connection and then share in worship together. There have even been some creative churches that have licensed an FM radio channel and have parishioners gather at a parking lot and tune in. One pastor even preached with a microphone system from the back of a red pickup truck, and everyone rolled down their windows to listen. However, given the restrictions on groups gathering in many locations, this option is not available in many communities right now. However you may be sharing your worship service, I want you to think of your worship in terms of the mission field you are trying to reach. There are some churches that view worship as just simply based on the needs and tastes of their existing members, and this often develops a kind of club mentality. It's not very open to people who are viewing in from the outside. However, there are other churches that view worship as a means to spread the good news to the community around them. During these turbulent times, I encourage you to design worship through the lens of people who are tuning in who have never been to church, or have seldom attended, or have had a negative church experience. Take a look at your worship service, and is it easy to follow if you're not a member? Specifically, here are some do's and don'ts. Early in your worship service, greet those who have tuned in. Expect guests and welcome them. Avoid lots of announcements. Do announcements during the week through emails, texts, mailings, whatever. Nothing turns off a first-time guest like 10 minutes of announcements filled with insider information about events and people a guest knows nothing about. Keep your service brief. Many people tuning in have short attention spans. The average 30-minute television show has only about 22 minutes of content. New people will leave long, drawn-out services. Have your message early in the worship service. Use humor, use stories, connect with people. People need reassurance, hope, and practical next steps in faith. Be sure to invite people back at the end of the worship service and give them a reason to return. Thank them for being with you and tell them about what's coming up next. Maybe a sermon series, a midweek book study, a program for the kids, or a mission opportunity, a way of helping out your community during this time. And as much as possible, get first-time guest information. Churches invite people to sign in on a website or a Facebook page, or say hello through a church app. Then follow up and thank people for being there with you. Through all the worship service, give the message that the church is there for the community. If you are helping out some way in the town, show pictures and videos of this, of the church at work making a difference. Do shout outs to those who are serving the community, such as police, fire, medical personnel, grocery store employees, postal workers, and so forth. Thank them for being out there on the front lines right now. There are even some churches that are taping messages that are videoed out in the community at some place that town members would recognize. Again, the point is that as a congregation, we need to be conveying the message that the church is there to support the community. This is a great time for our church members to learn how to invite. Currently in this country, only 2% of churchgoers invite guests and bring them to church. The Missouri Conference did a study of United Methodist churches and discovered that the average United Methodist invites someone to church once every 38 years. Yikes! Right now is a great time to improve those invitation numbers. As a church member, you can send a link to a website, or to a live stream, or to a conference call number to a friend, a neighbor, a family member. This is less intimidating than saying, "Will you come to church with me?" It is also easier for the guests to check us out in the comfort of their own homes. So send people information to your worship services, book studies, whatever you're doing. If there are check-in times your pastor's having during the week for people to call in, invite them to join. Ask people if there is a way your church can pray for them right now. And members are discovering that guests readily respond to prayer. I realize that this is a steep learning curve for many of our churches. We are learning new ways of doing church right on the fly. I encourage you, however, to develop technologies and systems that you can use well into the future. Technology is not something we're going to do just during a crisis. It is the way most people live today. And if we want to share the gospel, the new habits we develop right now will be a huge part of our ministry and mission going forward. So these are some thoughts on worship during the COVID-19 crisis. Again, you will need to customize some of these suggestions based on the size of your congregation and the mission field you are trying to reach. But what a great opportunity we have to connect people to the good news. Now let's turn to our other topic today of stewardship and finance during these trying days. Many churches are upgrading their online giving options. The reality is that this is how most people do commerce today, with direct deposit of checks, online banking, debit cards, and so forth. The goal is to give as many options as you possibly can. Now, if most of your members still use envelopes and write checks, well, then make sure you stay in touch with those folk and encourage them to mail them in instead of putting them in an offering plate. But overall in this country, paper giving is decreasing and online giving is increasing. So churches are inviting members to have checking accounts debited each month. Others have locations on their websites to make donations. And still other churches have a church app that allow people to make donations from their phones. Offer as many options as you can in your setting. There's a list of resources in the back of your worksheet for help with online giving. And during your worship services, be sure to reference whatever options you have. Giving is all about relationships. So during this time while we are apart, many churches are setting up phone systems to connect with members. Each member of a phone team gets a segment of the membership list and calls each member to see how they're doing, if they have a prayer request or need groceries or something else. This is a great time to thank people for their giving, to write thank you notes, and to share stories of how their dollars are making a difference. And speaking of stories, while we are sheltered in our homes, have your stewardship people collect stories. In written, audio, or video form, have people share how their faith has grown, how the church has been important to them, and why they give. Build a backlog of stories that you can post online, share in worship, or use down the road for a stewardship campaign. I would also encourage you to have a virtual meeting with your finance team right now and do some planning for the future. Some of the dynamics churches are looking at include what is the impact of the current crisis on the budget? In some churches, most of the congregation have steady income and there's little effect. In other churches, there's much unemployment and things have changed drastically. Have a discussion about where your church is right now. What is the impact on staff, building, and so forth? If you were doing a stewardship campaign later in the spring or in the fall, you may need to carefully review each member's situation and make a customized ask for a pledge. For some churches, this will be the year when you will need to use endowments or reserve funds to supplement the budget. This may be a time when you need to go to high capacity givers in your congregation and ask them to go a second mile to compensate for those whose income has been severely diminished. And you may have members who have been very generous for many years, who this year will make the most sacrificial gift they have ever made, but it will be much smaller than usual. We need to be ready to honor the widow's mite and to make people feel good about that sacrificial gift. Just one other note. At the time of this video, the Small Business Administration is just beginning to roll out a program, which is part of the national financial support that is coming out, where it may be possible for small businesses and nonprofits to get forgivable loans as long as they maintain their staff and pay them. Again, this is just in the early stages, and I would keep in touch on this. Horizon Stewardship, which is listed in your resources, is particularly good at doing updates on this. Discipleship and stewardship are intimately connected. While people are in their homes, this may be a great time for leadership to develop some new resources, some book and Bible studies, mentoring relationships, and a variety of avenues to help people go deeper in faith. Discipleship is all about trusting God with our lives, including our pocketbooks. give people opportunities to grow in their faith during this time. In the last few minutes, I've shared with you a variety of strategies around worship and stewardship. If you're feeling a little overwhelmed, that's okay. Many of us are in this time period. Take some time and review your notes and pick out a couple of things that will have the most impact in your ministry setting. Do a couple of things well that will bless others. This is a great time to be the church. As one writer said, we worship a God who is in the resurrection business. In these trying times, be that voice of reassurance and hope to communities that are frightened and anxious. It is a great time to be the church. I want to thank you for being on this video today. Thank you for taking the time. I hope that you will bless many people in these days ahead, members of your congregation and members of the community. May God bless all the efforts that you do in these days ahead. Take good care.